Everyone says babies are the future. Sure, that sounds nice. But here's the part no one tells you. Without babies, the economy doesn't just slow down, it falls apart, no matter how many billionaires exist. We're constantly told that billionaires run the world. They move markets, own companies, influence politics, and dominate the headlines. Meanwhile, babies seem like the least powerful group imaginable. No money, no voice, no influence, no seat at the table. But what if that entire story is backwards? Because behind the scenes, babies are quietly holding up the system that billionaires benefit from. And once you see how, you can't unsee it. Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why governments lose more sleep over falling birth rates than stock market crashes, and why the real power in the economy isn't where you think it is. Babies are the economy's hidden collateral. Before we get into the real deal, we need to understand one basic thing, because without it, none of this makes sense. The economy doesn't actually run on money, it runs on promises. Governments promise pensions, they promise health care, they promise social security, and to keep those promises, they borrow massive amounts of money, trillions. But here's the question no one asks. Who is that money really borrowed from? Not billionaires, not corporations, it's borrowed from the future. When a government takes on debt today, it's quietly assuming that future workers will show up, earn incomes, and pay taxes to cover the bill. And those future workers, they start out as babies. This is the hidden role babies play in the economy. They're not just new people being born, they're the collateral behind the entire system. Every pension check, every public hospital, every government bond only works if there are enough people in the next generation to support it. Here's the twist most people miss. Babies are what make government promises believable. Without them, the math simply stops working. You can't print taxpayers, you can't automate them fast enough, and you definitely can't replace them overnight. Now imagine what happens when fewer babies are born. Fewer kids grow up into workers. Fewer workers means fewer taxes. Fewer taxes means those big promises start looking a lot like broken ones. This is why governments panic over declining birth rates, even when the economy looks fine on paper. Markets can crash and recover, debt can be refinanced. But once the pipeline of future taxpayers dries up, there's no quick fix. That leads to an uncomfortable truth. No babies doesn't just mean a smaller economy. It means a system that can't keep its promises. And this is where things get even more interesting, because when governments realize that future taxpayers are disappearing, they don't just panic, they start changing how the entire economy is managed. Why central banks care about birth rates? Once governments realize future taxpayers are disappearing, they don't just adjust budgets, they start reshaping how the economy works. That's why central banks quietly track birth rates alongside inflation and employment. Birth rates tell them how many workers, consumers, and taxpayers will exist decades from now. And that single projection influences decisions most people assume are purely financial. Fewer babies today means fewer workers tomorrow. When the labor force shrinks, companies struggle to expand, productivity slows, and long-term growth weakens. In response, central banks keep interest rates low for longer, hoping cheap money can compensate for missing people. But here's what rarely gets discussed. Low birth rates don't just slow the economy, they can trap it. With fewer young workers entering the system, wages stagnate, innovation becomes harder, and economies start leaning heavily on debt and stimulus just to maintain stability. Some countries seem stuck in a strange limbo of low growth, low inflation, and permanent economic support. It's not just policy mistakes or bad leadership, it's demographics quietly steering the outcome years in advance. This also explains something that seems confusing at first. Even when markets are calm and the economy looks healthy, governments still panic over declining birth rates. Because they're not worried about next year, they're worried about what happens when today's workforce retires and there's no one big enough to replace it. Birth rates don't make headlines, but they shape interest rates, wages, and growth for decades. That raises an uncomfortable question. If babies determine whether the economy can grow at all, What happens to all the wealth being created today if there's no one left to sustain it? And if you like scripts that connect the dots between things most people never link together, demographics, money, and power, hit like and subscribe. It tells the algorithm to keep bringing you the deeper stuff. Now, let's talk about wealth, because this is where the billionaire narrative starts to fall apart. Why billionaire wealth needs babies to matter. We're told billionaires are the backbone of the economy. They create jobs, drive innovation, and fuel growth. And in the short term, that's partly true. But there's a deeper dependency hiding underneath all that wealth. Money only has power if there are people to give it meaning. A billionaire can own companies, stocks, real estate, and entire industries, but none of that works without workers to run those companies, consumers to buy the products, and taxpayers to keep the system functioning. Every part of that chain begins with people, and people begin as babies. As population shrinks, something subtle but dangerous happens. Markets stop growing, demand weakens, entire industries start fighting over fewer customers instead of expanding to serve more. Wealth doesn't disappear overnight. It slowly loses its purpose. This is why declining birth rates worry corporations just as much as governments. Fewer babies today means fewer customers tomorrow. Fewer renters, fewer subscribers, fewer buyers. Growth turns into competition over a shrinking pie. And here's the uncomfortable reality. People don't need billionaires to exist. Communities existed long before modern capital markets. But billionaires absolutely need people, not just as workers, but as consumers and participants in the economy. Without new generations entering the system, wealth becomes static. It sits in accounts, moves between assets, but stops driving real growth. At that point, even massive fortunes start to look fragile, which leads to a powerful realization. The real question isn't how much wealth exists, it's whether there will be enough people in the future for that wealth to matter at all. Babies are the only economic stimulus that never stops. This is where babies stop looking like a social issue and start looking like an economic engine. Every time a baby is born, an invisible chain reaction begins. Not all at once, but over decades. Diapers, food, healthcare, housing, education, transportation, technology. One child quietly triggers spending across almost every sector of the economy, year after year. Unlike government stimulus or corporate investment, this kind of demand doesn't expire, it grows. A baby becomes a student, then a worker, then a consumer with their own household. And eventually they support the next generation, restarting the cycle all over again. That's what makes babies such a unique economic force. They don't just create a short-term boost, they generate sustained demand for 50, 60, even 70 years. No policy package or bailout comes close to that kind of long-term impact. When birth rates fall, this chain reaction weakens. Entire industries feel it years later. Schools close, housing demand shifts, labor shortages appear. Governments respond with stimulus, tax cuts, or cheap money, but those are temporary patches, not replacements. Economies with aging populations feel like they're constantly trying to jumpstart growth. Without enough young people entering the system, demand shrinks from the inside out, spending becomes cautious, innovation slows, growth turns fragile. Babies don't show up in economic headlines, but they quietly power everything underneath them. They're the only form of stimulus that naturally renews itself. No votes required, no debt ceilings involved. And once that engine slows down, the entire system has to work harder just to stand still. The uncomfortable truth the governments don't say out loud. This is the part most people feel but rarely hear explained. Governments don't just care about how many babies are born, they care about who can afford to have them, even if they never say it out loud. Because the economy doesn't just need babies, it needs babies who grow up healthy, educated, and able to participate fully in society. Here's the quiet contradiction. The economy depends on families, yet modern economic systems make raising children increasingly expensive. Housing costs rise, childcare becomes unaffordable, education turns into debt. And slowly, parenthood shifts from a normal life stage into a luxury decision. This creates a self-reinforcing problem. The people most economically secure are more likely to delay or avoid having children. Meanwhile, those who do want kids are forced to make trade-offs that affect long-term outcomes. Over time, inequality doesn't just show up in income, it shows up in birth rates. Governments roll out baby bonuses, tax credits, and parental benefits. These aren't just social policies, they're attempts to protect the future workforce. When those incentives fail, countries turn to immigration debates, retirement age increases, and emergency economic measures. The tension at the center of it all? You can't force people to have children, and you can't fix demographic decline with money alone. Once trust in the system breaks, people stop planning for the future, including having kids. Outro. Billionaires may move money today, but babies decide whether the system survives tomorrow. If this changed how you see the economy, hit like and subscribe for more hidden truths. And watch the next video on screen to see how declining birth rates could reshape our future.